Hey guys, second video in the series. Today we're going to be talking about hearing and ears. Again, this is a review for my sensation and perception class. So the basics of sound. This is the gist. So this is what I think is important from the chapter and from the lectures. There's definitely going to be stuff that's missing. There's probably going to be some extra stuff. So basics of sound. Sound is basically this vibration that causes pressure changes. So in your throat, in your vocal tract, you basically push air through your vocal tract, and the vocal cords change the pressure using which is either condensation, which is like condensing the pressure, making it higher pressure, or rarefaction, which is like releasing the pressure, making it more spread out. And this gives it a couple of different properties. It gives it the property of a sound wave, giving it pitch, which is like higher if it has more waves, more frequent waves in hertz, and makes it louder. Amplitude, which is like the height of the wave. Taller is a louder sound in decibels. Humans have a pretty wide range of what they can hear, typically from about 0 hertz to about 20,000 hertz. However, human speech is what we're really good at, and for that reason, we're particularly good at about 2,000 to 8,000 hertz. But human speech is obviously a little bit more extreme than that. You can typically get up to like 10,000 hertz, and probably down as low to like, I don't know, maybe like 140 hertz, something like that. But pure tones are pretty rare. We don't speak in pure tones. We speak in complex tones, which are combinations of sine waves. And a pure tone is basically just like I don't know, a computer-generated sound basically would be a pure tone. But when we sing, like hallelujah, like that's not a sine wave. That's not a pure tone. That's got a lot of different partial harmonics in it. But we didn't talk about that in super great detail, so I'm pretty sure we're not going to have to replicate it on a test. Finally, there's timbre, which is the non-pitched part of a sound. So you can think about consonants. You can think about how a trumpet sounds different from a trombone, even though they're technically like playing the same notes, that sort of thing. Actually, I don't even know if that's possible, but I'm not a band guy. So in terms of actually hearing this, we have our ear. And this will be like the anatomical part of it, and we'll reference this back in the next couple sections. So there's 3 parts of the ear. There's the outer ear, which is the pinna, which is like your outer, like flappy part that we think of as an ear. And then the other part is the auditory canal, which is that little hole. It goes pretty deep, actually. Basically, the purpose of the outer ear is to amplify sound and protect the middle and inner ear from damage. How does it do this? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. The middle ear deals with, it starts with the tympanic membrane, but the tympanic membrane can also, like the outer portion is considered a part of the outer ear. The tympanic membrane is like this little, like it's your eardrum basically, and it absorbs sound waves and translates it into a pressure onto the malleus, which is the first of the 3 ossicles, the 3 smallest bones in your body. They all belong in your ear, in this little canal. So the tympanic membrane presses on the malleus at a certain frequency. It basically vibrates, putting pressure on the malleus. The malleus presses on the incus. The incus presses on the stapes, and the stapes presses into the oval window of the cochlea. And so in this way, the ear can translate from air pressure, air waves basically, into like a mechanical wave, which is like the tympanic membrane and the ossicles, and then finally into like a liquid vibration, liquid waves in the cochlea. finally, there's the inner ear, and this one, forgive the crappy drawing, but I didn't like anything I found online, and I know that this drawing has all the pieces that we need. So the oval window. This diagram is like the unwound version of the cochlea that we see here. You can see it's kind of wound. We're starting like right here, and it goes like this, and then out again. So we start at the base in the oval window, and we enter, like the sound will enter through the oval window as a wave, and the cochlea is filled with liquid. So it's like a liquid wave, basically. You can kind of think of it as a liquid wave. And it goes, enters through the oval window at the base, goes through the vestibular canal, which is like the upper canal, basically. You can think of it like that. All the way to the apex. And once it reaches the apex, then it goes the way back around again, back around the spiral, through the tympanic canal, and then out the round window, which is right here. You can see it kind of just goes nowhere. It probably goes somewhere, but we didn't learn about it in class. The important part is this middle canal, which contains the organ of Corti. Before we get into that, we're going to talk about between the vestibular canal and the middle canal, there's the Reisner's membrane. And between the tympanic canal and the basilar membrane, or between the middle canal and the tympanic canal, there's the basilar membrane. And inside the middle canal, pressed up against the Reisner's membrane and the basilar membrane, is this organ of Corti. And the organ of Corti looks like this, kind of. There's little tips on the top of these, what they're called stereocilia, which are like little hair cells. And when these hair cells move, they basically uncap these potassium ion channels. And when those potassium ion channels are opened, when they're uncapped from that movement, they K+ will flood into the cell, depolarizing the membrane, causing the membrane potential, which then synapses onto an auditory nerve. And when it bends towards the longest, so like long, you can kind of see here, some are long, some are short. When it bends towards the longest, that's a depolarization. When it bends towards the shortest, that's a hyperpolarization. How does that work? Well, when a sound comes through, there's vibration, right? That causes movement on these membranes. And so when a sound enters through the oval window, it causes vibration in the vestibular canal, specifically along the Reisner's membrane. That activates stereocilia at the organ of Corti based upon the frequency at which it's vibrating. So if I have a 2000 hertz sound, a pure tone, 2000 hertz, only at 2000 hertz will the vibration cause a change in the stereocilia and the organ of Corti. So in that way, it's like the organ of Corti is specific to a particular frequency of sound. That's why loud sounds can be kind of damaging, because the base is like the widest part of the membrane. That's the highest part of your range that you can hear. So when you have a loud sound, that's the first part that gets damaged. That's why we have hearing loss from really loud, really high sounds, and we can't hear higher sounds the older we get. And that kind of continues down until we get to the apex, which is like the lowest sounds, and then we go back through the tympanic canal, where there's still organs of Corti on the basilar membrane, and then it starts to get higher again. So how do we understand spoken language with this? Well, we've got our phonemes, and our phonemes are the smallest units of speech. They're basically patterns of air pressure And our brain can recognize a particular pattern of air pressure based upon the signal it gets from the cochlea. Um, and that's done on the way to the auditory cortex. So the auditory cortex does some of this processing, but there's a variety of different um, basically nuclei that along the way along the auditory pathway that process that auditory signal for final processing at the auditory cortex. Formants are basically the frequencies of air pressure peaks in the phenome. So you can think of them as like distinctive signatures for each phoneme. Phenome. So this comes into a couple of problems. So if you've ever used technology for voice recognition, it's often not very good because of a couple reasons. First, we use top-down processing for a lot of things. Namely, we can use it to fill in missing phonemes. So if I don't say the word, or if I don't say f in phonemes, chances are you didn't notice it when I just did it like 5 seconds ago. And you automatically fill that in. How do you do that? Well, context clues. You've heard me say phoneme before, and you're probably expecting me to say phoneme again because I'm continuing to talk about phonemes. See if you can figure out how many times I said phoneme versus oneme there. Well, we use context clues, and we also use visual cues. And visual cues are stuff like you can see on this PowerPoint that I'm going to say visual cues. So you probably would have heard visual cues even if I had said visual clues. Next, we've got the segmentation problem, which is when we write stuff, we have spaces between words, but when we're speaking, we actually don't have those. If you've ever heard someone speak in another language really quickly, typically it sounds really, really quick, and you don't hear any spaces between the words. Our brain does that for us. Our brain will automatically put the spaces in the words, in between the words, so that we can understand people. Finally, there's the variability problems. So if you have somebody with an accent, their phonemes can be distorted from what our norm is. And so our brain has to be able to basically recreate or basically transform their phonemes into something that it can understand. And it does this using the phoneme restoration effect, context, basically. We can basically, our brain can guess what a person is saying based upon what they're talked about around it, if that makes sense. So if I'm talking about water, but I say wada, and I'm using like Wisconsin Dells and river, and I'm using words like that, like you can probably guess that when I say wada, it's probably like water. And we also use categorical perception, which is this idea that when there's an ambiguous phoneme or word, we'll sort those sounds into a particular category based upon context. So, this is a decent representation that I stole directly from Dr. Pritchard's slide of what this kind of looks like in the brain. So this is actually a really high quality picture of the brain. Nice. Well, auditory, so we've got our concept representation here in the auditory motor interface. No, frick, that's not right at all. Basically, this diagram, there's interfaces between our different important parts. So parts of speech. There's the concepts, so what you want to say. You've got your auditory speech decoding, so this is like your understanding of speech. And there's motor speech encoding, encoding. So decoding is like you're hearing something and you're trying to decode it. You're trying to figure out what it means. That's this red part. And the motor speech encoding system is like you talking. You need to figure out what to talk about. That's like the Broca's area. this auditory speech decoding is the Wernicke's area. Um, and finally, we've got concept representation, which I imagine is like generally all of this. There's a lot of stuff that goes into concept representation in the auditory association area. And we have interface systems, which make up the bulk of these. So translating from meaning to decoding, and translating from decoding into encoding, that sort of thing. So finally, I think this is the last major thing. Yeah. So the last major thing that we're going to talk about is lesions in speech centers, so specifically aphasias. The first type that we talked about was Wernicke's aphasia, which occurs in Wernicke's area, something like that. So when you're producing speech, you have your primary auditory area in which you hear stuff, right? And like you process the hearing of it. Well, then that signal is sent to the Wernicke's area, for like association and meaning, that sort of thing. And it's in Wernicke's area that when Wernicke's area is wiped out, we see that there's comprehension problems. People can no longer understand words. And that can be really, really hard on them. These are the people that are fluent. So they can talk normally in what sounds normal to them, but they can't understand meaning of words. They don't understand that they aren't getting their point across. But they tend to not have a problem with that because they can't tell that they're not getting their point across. So after we go from Wernicke's area, we go to Broca's area in order to translate into speech. So this meaning now can go through to Broca's area, where that meaning is transformed into some sort of production. Basically how we want to say something. And in Broca's aphasia, there's problems with the production of speech. Specifically, they can't produce words fluently, and there's a lot of filler speech. They tend to speak slowly and take a lot of time. They take a lot of time to process their words. That sort of thing. And then once we get past the production problems, there's a final part, a final kind of aphasia. There's probably more, but these are the three we covered in class. Is that there's error-filled speech, but they can understand really well. So their Wernicke's area is functioning fine because they can understand the meaning of words, and they can understand that they're not saying the right thing. Their Broca's area is functioning just fine because there isn't any issue with their actual production of words. They're just as quick and just as fluent. But there's an issue with their arcuate fasciculus. I hope I said that right. Arcuate fasciculus, which is the pathway between the Wernicke's area and the Broca's area. Basically, what this means is they know what to say, they can understand words, but they can't produce particular sound and will fill in the wrong phonemes. So there's like an interface error. There's a translational error between the meaning and the production. Well, I think we can go on. No, let's not. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you get some help from these videos, and I'll probably be doing one more because I've got one more section to do.